Hi, welcome everybody. Thanks so much for joining us for the latest Rootwurks webinar, How to Build a Brand in Cannabis. My name is Ben Hartman. I'm the content manager here at Rootwurks. I'll be your host for this webinar today. So as you're all aware, it's pretty difficult times a lot of cannabis companies are facing, from lower prices to oversaturation, all types of issues. And in this webinar, we're going to look at some steps that companies can nonetheless take to work through some of those problems and build a brand that sticks out from the crowd and hopefully can last. So to make sense of it all, we got a couple of experts here today that I'd like to go ahead and introduce. First off, we have Angela Pye, the head of marketing for State House Holdings. Angela is a brand accelerator with decades of experience in all types of fields, from cannabis to wellness, premium lifestyle brands. Also the winner of 3 Cannabis Clios and was named to Green Market Report's 2023 Women's Leadership Award. That's a lot. Angela, thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on the show.
Of course, our pleasure. Also with us today is Brian Holler, the Chief Marketing Officer for Concept Matrix Solutions, technology-based manufacturing company that serves the cannabis industry, has more than 15 years experience in tech, startups, professional services, and CPG and retail. Hey, Brian, how are you doing?
Hello, I'm doing well, Ben. How are you?
Oh, great. And thank you both for being here, obviously. So this first question, I guess it's kind of a broad one, and it could take up an hour or two, but well, we'll try not to. But I guess we could start with you, Angela. If you were to advise a new company that wants to build a brand, or let's say an existing one that wants to kind of, I guess, solidify themselves or break out, like is there one real step that sticks out to you?
Well, I always start from the beginning, and that has to do with the consumer. Who are you designing your products and your brands for? You know, hone in on who that consumer is going to be. Look at what their needs are, what their behaviors are, and how can actually you be relevant in terms of creating those products. So I always start with the data.
So there was know who you're targeting and know what you want to do. Brian, what do you say about it?
Well, I would agree with Angela. First and foremost, know who you appeal to before you start spending money towards trying to appeal to somebody. And ultimately, I also think really developing a story that everybody can agree on and that really serves as sort of a central beacon for your team and your business moving forward, I think is a big one as well.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about that. How important is that story? Because I'm used to seeing with a lot of cannabis brands, there's often like a sort of not exactly like a comic book origin story, but there is a sort of like, they try to present sort of, something that tells a story about a brand and a passion for cannabis and why they went into this and why it's important and why it's not, just a product. Angela, do you think that's really important for connecting with people?
I think it is. Well, obviously, as a brand builder, I think your origin story, what you stand for, what you represent, what's important to you as a brand are very critical elements to be able to tell. Now, I think that brand story is probably more important for certain categories than others. Let's say for a wellness or a therapeutic brand, that origin story, like Papa and Barkley, has been critical in terms of standing behind how it came to be, in terms of Adam creating a pain bomb specifically for his dad to get him out of hospice to help with his spinal stenosis. And then this product, which was made out of love, then became available for a wider audience. So that origin story really hones in on, it's so good, you're creating this for the ones you love. So the people who are most important to you. So that really grabs you and says that we put such integrity into the product that we make. We give it and we provide that to the people we love most in the world. That is very powerful. Now, if you're looking at flower brands in terms of who's the cultivator, where they came from, what are they doing in terms of genetics, in terms of strains, in terms of their integrity of their growing practices. And if you're looking at a different category for, say, vapes or pre-rolls, what is that story? Why are you creating these types of products? What levels of prowess and integrity are you putting in, and how did you start? I think people want to know who they're buying into and who are they supporting. And so that level of storytelling is important. Although one might say, hey, a shopper goes into a dispensary, they don't really care. They're just looking at prices and potency. And that's one aspect of it. But in order to be a sustained brand, to be able to build your loyalty, you need to put in the time.
Yep. I would also add on to that by saying that it's not about that short-term experience or just that short-term kind of high I need to look at. There's always going to be that, there's always going to be people going to the dispensary who just want that fire, and, they just want, and they're going to be triggered by certain elements of, of the flower that, will appeal to them, which nothing wrong with that at all, but ultimately if you're going to, continue to even appeal to that person, to be fair, but extending to, other audiences and stuff, you're going to want to continue to have this story that you can sort of, as Angela was alluding to, nurture and grow and align to all your, products and your whole team and your, and everything, about your brand.
I see it a lot with people that say cultivators or brands that have a background back in the legacy market, and they kind of, I feel like it's a good story to tell. We were doing this way back when we had to be outlaws and all that. And I think that's always usually a pretty guaranteed kind of compelling story. But what if it's somebody who, you also kind of people who are kind of the opposite, who are they're just entrepreneurs. They don't have a background. They weren't, growing cannabis when it was legal, and they didn't treat anybody in their family either. They think it's a place with a lot of opportunities, and they want to get into it. Do they, what do people like that do? They just, I guess, lean more on the products themselves as opposed to kind of brand story?
Oh, I mean, I think you can do both. I think that it just depends on, what your, I don't know, what your brand, what your kind of, what your differentiators are, right? Explore those if it's not such a logical transition story. Or you got to be careful too. Some of those stories become tropes, that people kind of expect. They lose their punch. Even though, if you ask me, I think it's fantastic when, somebody from a legacy grower, comes into the light and, and repurposes themselves. And, and I think that is important to tell. And I think the history of cannabis and cannabis prohibition is super important to talk about. And if that aligns very well with your brand or your brand as it likes to pertain to activism or what have you, fantastic, of course, do it. But that doesn't have to be everybody, to be fair. And on top of that, if that's not really you, yet you feel like, hey, we have a target market here, and we have a voice that I think would be cool, and we have a good differentiator in terms of our products. Let's see what we can do. Think outside the box. You think, I mean, go all sorts of places. Like, don't be constricted. It's not as if cannabis branding is a trend or like some different thing. That's what I think is interesting. Yes, there's hindrances, and it's tougher. You have to be more innovative than your typical branding expert to, I think, be in cannabis. But I think a lot of people would do well to take, to look at cannabis branding. It's not like something different. It's branding and design and marketing and a brand voice and things that other companies in toothpaste are doing. You might want to consider. The process that those teams take to develop their voice and to expand and to create their stories. Those are things you might want to look at doing for your team.
So in terms of the juxtaposition, take a look at a brand like Farmer and the Felon. That's basically the Ned and Dennis story, right? So Dennis was in jail for 7.5 years. So, he's the felon. Truly, he was on the run. And then you have Ed, who's the cultivator, who's the farmer. So you actually built that brand that ties into who they are and their history and their relationship with cannabis. And then you look at another brand like Steezy.
Yeah.
So they are holding on to being unapologetically culture in terms of the culture of cannabis, unapologetically urban. Now, do they have a long history with being cultivators and multi-generational growers? No, but they also have put together a team who are, building that discipline and cultivation practices and be able to communicate that. So I think there's space for all of the people who want to come into cannabis and are building up brands and creating businesses. I think ultimately we're still finding our way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's still a new legal industry, and I don't think anybody wants to be or shouldn't try to be like a gatekeeper. Like we were here first, and you're a latecomer. I don't think that necessarily helps anybody. You mentioned earlier, Brian, innovation. How important is it to look at, how we can do things differently? I mean, if you're selling, let's say flour,
Sure.
is there enough wiggle room or let's say there isn't maybe enough to make it something like to reinvent the wheel, as it were. How important is innovation?
Oh, I would say, pretty important, in terms of, staying on top of innovation, especially today, might be equally as important, because everything's moving so fast. And as things ease up or, regulations, basically increase or, decrease, there's going to be so many different things to consider. And then in terms of product development, I think there's a lot of places that we can go that people, have yet to explore. Lots of fun combinations using, things like nutraceuticals, even with cannabinoids, and exploring different kind of product types and segments. I mean, like beverages are, they're doing okay right now. It's starting to get a little bit of a motor behind them. I mean, we're not like talking, flower or pre-roll levels, and we're not even close to that. But I do think that there's a lot to be said for bringing in new audiences and attaching innovation to that. Right. I like to consume. I'm a big fan of cannabis. I enjoy flower and pre-rolls. You're probably not going to see me, buying edibles very often. But I'm not everybody who would enjoy cannabis, and I'm not indicative in terms of people who might be wanting to just sort of tiptoe. And I don't tiptoe. I'm already, here. So bottom line is, right, as are all of us on this call, I suspect. But anyhow, point is that that's not everybody. There's a big market out there, lots of different great audiences, and I do think that product, either innovation and branding, or the combination of the two, can really, really do a great job for cannabis companies, and making sure that you're not spreading yourself too thin. But I think that's just in general something smart for everybody to remember.
Yeah, being able to sustain both as well. What are you doing to serve and cater to the regular high volume cannabis consumer, right?
That's right.
And also having enough of an investment in, say, with the 2% of where the beverage industry is right now within cannabis, with infused beverages, which is just under 2%, I think. There are a lot of brands that have looked at how do we encourage the Canna Curious to become more regular cannabis consumers. And that's still more of an investment versus what's going to keep the lights on.
Correct.
I mean, I think this relates to, we got a good question here from Jake P. Kellison on LinkedIn. Thoughts on bringing the older generation to align with your brand? Now, I don't know how close all of us here are to the older generation, but I mean, it's something we talk about a lot, that you see these articles like your grandparents are now, how to talk to your grandparents about weed, how to, this sort of things. How do you market or bring in, a brand to, let's say, what's not everybody's, what everybody pictures first when they think of a cannabis consumer?
I'm happy to jump in on this one. During my Poplar and Barkley days, something that we created was called the Desert Activation. So what we did was really looking at the high concentration of assisted senior living in Palm Springs and Palm Desert. We partnered with several of the assisted living facilities. We went in with Cannabis 101 education seminars as part of their programming. And seniors who we educate about the use of cannabis that might help them for relief, we then allowed them for a week to sign up for a dispensary, literally a handheld dispensary visit. So we were busing seniors to dispensaries, to partner dispensaries who we had already created a partnership program with, where we know that they would have enough of Pop and Barkley products there. So educating, kind of getting in there, providing the vehicle, literally, and the brand ambassadors to chaperone seniors into a dispensary, giving them a sense of what that dispensary visit is going to be like, so it's not intimidating, so they're not having a scary experience. Having the retail partner who's going to be ready to be able to service a senior during a low traffic time of the day, so that they can have more engaging conversations with bud tenders. So during the 90 days of the desert activation, we did radio, we had newspaper, we had billboards, and we had articles that were printed about cannabis wellness from Forbes, so articles that they would be familiar with. And during that 90-day period, we had educated over 1,200, so 1,200 seniors. And at the height of the desert activation, which was just before the pandemic, we bussed over 100 seniors to one of our participating dispensaries.
Wow.
Now, the dispensaries who we partner with in the desert continue to be the most loyal dispensaries for Papa and Barkley, because we, as a brand, brought educated consumers to their door and facilitated that conversation. Now, we were paying, I think, $30 per person in terms of the busing, but think about the value of what we were bringing to the retail partner, and also in terms of creating customers, creating loyalty for our brand that will be sustaining over time. So at that time, we were looking at an average basket size of $180.
Oh, wow.
And then you're looking at a repeat, because like most people, and especially for seniors, if they're finding something that really works for them, you have incredible amount of loyalty. Mm-hmm. So, got to put in the work. You got to be willing to put in the groundwork. As we all know on this panel, that it's a boots on the ground kind of business. Mm-hmm. So you got to put in the executional work.
Yes. You have to do the things. That is correct.
You have to do the things, do the education, handhold the experience, partner with your retailers, and be willing to do something and create an opportunity for that conversation.
Yeah, develop those relationships. That is, and find strategic partnerships that align, in terms of with overall outcomes. Right.
Mm-hmm.
That's
up
very smart.
Even now, I don't know any brand who was willing to bus 100 seniors in one day to a dispensary.
What I'm saying, right?
It honestly sounds pretty fun to go with a busload of senior citizens to a dispensary.
I would have been all about
that. They are so much fun. We did a lot of content. We didn't overexpose it. We really created for more of an internal morale, as well as for senior assisted living facilities that we're bringing this content to as well. And they are looking for programming.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there you go.
Really fun. That'd be very fun. I imagine also just in the general principle, when you target or you address people who maybe aren't used to being spoken to in a particular market, then people appreciate that,
Yes. Aligning, your brand and the content that's being churned out by it, or the partnerships that you're, exploring to really provide an experience,
mm-hmm.
For your audience is, key. I mean, that's what you got to do. And if you can do that, in real life with real life examples, like busing people to a dispensary, that's fantastic. There's those are going to be loyal customers forever.
That makes sense. I mean, that's what they do on election day, right? They bus people around. You can pick people up, get one there, get them.
Hey, well, you want to get votes? Carry the people to the voting poll. That's right.
Yeah, well, I'm favorite. I only fit about 5 in my car, so there's only so many senior citizens I can take to a dispensary, but I'm up for it. So I guess this plays into the brand story concept, because so much of it is part of like the appearance or the packaging. How important is that for brands? Because I mean, you see a lot of really beautiful products and packaging and all that, and then a lot that just kind of some can look pretty similar to the rest of the stuff. Is that something that is really important, or you don't want to spend too much time on? What do you think?
Oh, I mean, I could see Angela just going, no time on it. What are you talking about? I mean, like, obviously there are ways that you can, budget for such things, but if you're going to save money, packaging is not where I would suggest you do it. I would suggest that you do, very much, but then again, it has to align with your brand. So bottom line is, if you have a very streamlined, gritty, very just straightforward, brand, then that's what your packaging should look and feel like, Mm-hmm. So that happens to align with, lower costs, because you don't have to do, finishing and, extra, bells and whistles for, gloss and that sort of a thing, then, good for you, I guess. But I would still also adhere to, what I like to call in cannabis is, not just best practices, but better than best practices. And so if you at least construct your package to sort of the standards and the principles of other industries that have been around for a long time, that will get you'll be at a higher level than many others. And then of course the real fun stuff like the story and aligning with your brand comes into play. So as long as if you can just align yourself to like packaging and design best practices for other companies, other retail companies, or other retail industries, excuse me, that's a big differentiator still in the market. So that'll get you to a great place. And then really try to think about aligning that packaging to whatever your brand is.
I completely agree. And at least, call it the benchmark. Look like you mean it.
Yeah. Yep.
Look like you mean it. That right. You are very intentional. You understand that the design of your packaging is going to be relevant to who you're trying to target. Yep. Now, I actually think that, at least in California, there's an abundance of over packaging and waste.
Yes.
We overpackage so much that it's just not very sustainable. And on the other, and within in that comment, there's also, we don't need another Balenciaga of weed. So be something that is really meaningful to your consumer. So if you're going to be a value brand, look like a value brand. If you're going to be a hype brand, that's going to be, because, the hype brands have been really big in the last 18, 20 months, where you were getting much more, let's just call it street level versus, high street level. Then you need to be that, but stick with it and be consistent. And then also, if you're thinking about the different types of stores, are you going to be predominantly in a bud tender assisted shopping experience where the bud tender is going to be bringing you your final product, or it's going to be an open shelf self-select? Your packaging is going to have to be different for that. If it's going to be self-select, you're going to need a certain amount of being eye-catching as well as informative, and it's going to pass a ton of touch and feel and scrutiny. Versus if you're going to have a gatekeeper like a bud tender, then you want something that's going to be easily recognizable, so that your bud tender is not going to get the wrong SKU when they're actually going to be giving you that product. So everything in alignment in terms of looking at where it's going to be placed, who's going to be influencing that, and again, who are you really marketing to?
And think about how you're going to look next to all the people who do the same exact thing that you do.
My phone is full of photos from dispensaries. I'm in probably 4 to 5 dispensaries, and not even hours per week, and I'm constantly taking photos of what the shelf looks like for each category. And if we're designing a new product or a new brand, how is it going to stand out?
Yes, when I go, every time I just look for things that stand out to me, whether I like them or not. Could be in a completely different category. Maybe I'm not in the mood for that that day. But
I think a lot of times, especially in cannabis, when we're designing a brand or we're creating a brand, we have to keep ourselves out of it, because we might not necessarily be the target audience.
That's
so
right.
Whether it appeals to us or not, it's beside the point. It needs to appeal to who you're marketing to.
That's right. Which brings us back to that initial point you made, Angela, right straight away. It was data, right? That way we can just clutter. If we have some knowledge of who's buying this, and if it lines up, and when we hit these metrics and we know it leads to us selling, right? Then we know it's working, right? And if we can marry ourselves a little bit more to that, that's not to say that creativity and gut is not a thing. Those are things, but ultimately, if you can align them with the data, that's the key there.
Yeah, and I mean, make something that pops out but doesn't look too much like kids' candy, and it's something that's going to get you in trouble.
Well, you're not going to be able to get away with that anyway, just in terms of the how stringent package design, naming. We've seen a lot of trademark issues that's been coming up. And also the look and feel of products that look, child oriented rather than, just fun.
Yeah. I just think it's honestly, it's just a trope that's played out at this point. It's really just,
I think it's lazy.
There's way cooler things to do. There's way more innovative, fun, things to look at than trying to, rip off, Procter & Gamble's branding. So,
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And I was thinking just about the point earlier. It's something that I also had to remind myself sometimes, like, I'm not every cannabis consumer. Like, oh, I think it's cool, so it's cool. Maybe not, or or just to me.
Yes.
You mentioned, Angela, being in dispensaries and all that. How important is education? Let's say, because we work in cannabis education and training for dispensaries, frontline cannabis workers. Partnering with dispensaries to help them, like, teach them about brands or your story, or in the dispensary itself. How important do you think it is that bud tenders really, I guess, know things on a really deep level, really educated level?
I think it's the most important thing. It is, from what we can influence as a brand for adoption, for preference, for building up success or sustainable success. Your bud tenders, educating the store staff, sampling compliantly the store staff so they've tried it. The number of times where I walked into a dispensary and asked a bud tender about a product that they're recommending, and my first question is, have you tried it?
Mm-hmm.
And if they haven't, then it just becomes a bit of an empty recommendation, right?
Yeah.
So, have you been educated on it? Have you tried it? What is your actual experience? Those three things I look for. So whether it's a Zoltrain for virtual training, or it's an internal training, or it's a bud tender tasting event where they get to compliantly learn and try, are very critical. I think, some of the stats that we've seen is that bud tenders are influencing somewhere, 40% of purchases.
Oh, yeah.
And also, if I was to wear my my retailer hat, training your bud tenders to not just recommend what they like, but what they are, in that sort of couple of minutes of discovery with the shopper who's in front of them. That's also something that we have to nuance, because people tend to recommend what they like, but you need to look at the audience. And I think we see that as well when we look at our, Google reviews, where there might have been a miss, where a customer would write in, I spoke to a bud tender at such and such a store, and I told them that I had these types of ailments, and I'm not a high potency consumer, but then this bud tender recommended this, which was a miss because it didn't fit my need, and they didn't hear me. So we see that as well. So again, the discovery, understanding who that shopper is and what they need, and then recommending that. And I think the better and educated the bud tender, I think they are to be able to represent your retail brand, and then better to be able to represent the brands that you carry.
So you do all this work. You get all this investment, you put all this brand voice together, you put all this content strategy and your website, and you get your, everything's lined up, your packaging's looking sharp, you've gone through this whole rigmarole with manufacturers and all this sort of stuff, and you finally got this whole thing, and you don't think that the person, and then the person who's selling it doesn't matter. I don't understand how that works.
Stake in the heart.
Right. I'm not. So you did all this, right? Thousands and hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars spent, right? And you culled R&D costs, all this stuff to come down to basically, like Angela just pointed out, 40%. 40% of all your sales as a cannabis brand are going to come through this one person, this one vehicle, right? Mm-hmm. So not only does that person matter so much, doesn't that business that you're partnering with matter a lot? Doesn't that the way that they do business matter a lot? Doesn't the way that you kind of teach each other about how to do business matter a lot? Boy, it sure does. And and so to not emphasize that at all, I think seems kind of silly. Like I think maybe we get bogged down in cliche, terms like employee education, and like if you're an owner, you're like, employee education, stupid, whatever. Again, it's just about training your people to do what you need them to do, right? It's about teaching folks how to be better than. And on top of that, would you not want a bud tender or a salesperson who just says whatever the hell they want, or who's savvy enough to align the customer's needs with the appropriate brand or the appropriate product, right? Mm-hmm. That's what you want. And that's what they should want too. but it's your job to get them to want that, not the other way around. And so it's very important to remember sort of the responsibilities that we all have, and remember that it's not nothing. It's very important. It's, as Angela said, maybe the most important thing. You know, you need to know how to tell people how to sell your product. You need tons of practice doing it yourself and with your core team. You need to just continue to do it and do it and do it and do it until it's you. It's who you are.
Yeah.
You know, and then that will you can convey that to the bud tender. Hopefully you can get the bud tender there at some point, right?
Well, in addition to that 40%, right? With our stores, what we've noticed is that brands who are activating in our stores on their demo days get 2.5 times lift versus the average.
That's it.
So
there's lots of
when you talk to
data.
brands, they say, companies have cut back on their marketing teams. They've cut back on education. They've cut back on brand ambassadors. If you're not going to be able to invest all the way down to the ground level,
You shouldn't do it.
You shouldn't do it, because then you're just putting product on shelf and hoping for the best.
Yes. I mean, I love the position I'm in now because we get to work with people and I can say that to them without any reservations. Hey, we're not going to get into business developing products with you if you have zero budget for marketing, or you have no knowledge of how to, train a bud tender to help align to vocalize your brand and your differentiators, and to really, and you understand how to treat a retail partner. You know what I mean? Like, those are important things. We all have, as they say, skin in the game when it comes to that point. And it does matter to me. It would matter to me even if I didn't have skin in the game, to be fair. You should do a good job, and you should treat people the way that they should be treated. And on top of that, you should, basically align, what you're doing to whatever that feel is for your brand. And and I think that's just and then if you can convey that passion, you can harness that, in a story in different ways. And then it just permeates throughout all your assets. Then that bud tender will have no choice but to, basically absorb it, because it'll be exciting to them. It'll be interesting, and they'll want to remember it.
We all know what good customer service feels like.
Right.
Because we've experienced it. We experienced good customer service. We've all experienced bad customer service. And that good customer service is going to have your shopper coming back to your store asking for that bud tender. So it's good for business too. And, in California, I think we're looking at, on average, maybe 6 months is the turnover for bud tenders. So
that's right. I knew it was less than a year for sure.
Yeah. So if you've gone in and you've educated the bud tenders, you need to constantly go back. It's not one and done and set it, forget it. Just gonna say, oh yeah, we were there, a year ago. We were there like 6 months ago. You've got a constantly rotating army of bud tenders, and you need to be on it monthly.
Look at them as an extension of your entire team.
Sales
like
team.
Literally, just look at them look at everybody that you work with as a whole kind of conglomerate, right? That should be involved. If you hey, let them know you're going to do stuff. If they want to be involved or not, or if it lines up perfectly or not, all good. It doesn't always have to be that way, but you're letting them know you're in the know. Hey, you're part of the team. We're part of this. You're growing with us. People want to be involved. They want to be part of things. They want to be part of things that are bigger than themselves, and brands can be that. They often are. The most successful ones are extremely good examples of that. They will live on far after their founders and their initial teams, are around or aren't around any longer. That's a brand, that's sort of what you want to aim for, shoot high. Don't be afraid either. Go for it,
Yeah. Well, I think also, not investing in any sort of education. I mean, it could be seen almost, I don't know about dismissive of consumers with sort of this assumption they don't want more than just like a drive-through.
Right.
But people actually do want to know more about, a lot of people, myself included. If I'm speaking to somebody, you're about to drop a lot of money too, especially. You both mentioned marketing a couple of times. How do you do it? How do you get around some of these restrictions that you have in cannabis? As opposed to, you both worked in other industries before. They didn't have those same restrictions. how did you make that shift, or is it basically,
does banging your head on the table and getting pissed work? Because that keeps not working, to be fair. No. The professional in me wants to say that it has forced a lot of great innovation, and there's a lot of cool ways to that we found that you can realistically market your brand without having to be able to show products or use a lot of the sort of usual mechanisms, or there's a lot of like maybe compliance things that you have to do and put in your captions or on your images that no one else has to do in any other field, which is ludicrous, PS. But ultimately, it has forced us to sort of think about larger than that. Okay, so you're part of it's a voice, and it's a feel, it's a culture, it's a lifestyle, it's something else, which has honestly forced sort of the best of the best to really accelerate in terms of best practices. And to be fair, it's also been a big burden for a lot of folks, because a lot of people are like, well, I can get to like the good enough place, and how come now I can't just do the thing where I do my little A/B test and I put my money in my right? And you should be able to do that, to be fair. But ultimately, it's not how it is yet. So, but I do think that's easing up overall. To be fair, there's also new emerging platforms, and there's also all sorts of different ways that you can really just double down on certain ones that really are cannabis friendly. Also, I think having like a LinkedIn strategy is not the worst idea. Even for a brand, B2B is your ply and trade even still. And LinkedIn is probably one of the more friendly platforms to cannabis, where you're going to meet like real people who are really in the space, who are really doing things, and then, yeah, don't be afraid to really, again, align that education can be this differentiator. Like education can be the workaround, so to speak, for this, right? Or maybe you do work with nonprofits. That's a great thing to talk about. Anything that can bring attention to your brand that basically is outside of the things that are regulated heavily, right? Unfair, yes, but has also forced a lot of people to kind of expand the idea of what their brand is, which I think is a good thing.
That makes sense. What do you think, Angela? How do you get around those restrictions? Is it doubling down on what can work, or just trying to think outside the box, as it were?
I don't think it's about getting around. It's about looking for those right tactics that work for you. I've often found that there are ways to do full funnel marketing where you are looking at awareness, you're looking at acquisition, you're looking at high touch and digital. So if you're looking at high touch, you've got in-person events, you've got whether it's a dispensary event or a tasting party that you might want to put together, events where people can show up and engage and learn. So high touch events, I think, are really important on the one hand. And then you're looking at, your paid search, you're looking at programmatic, you're looking at PR. So there are ways from both ends of the spectrum to be able to target your consumer and be effective all along that full funnel. Yep. And don't forget about CRM. We've been able to effectively use CRM at Pop and Barkley, at Canacraft, and here at State House with our retail brands, which are Harborside and Urban Leaf. We launched a loyalty program in January 17th. We have over 280,000 active members in the TOPS loyalty program.
It's great.
Which is amazing. Now, we also had what I would call legacy first-party data from Harborside and Urban Leaf. Harborside, that's been in business since 2006. So our entire database is almost 1 million people in California, and we have 280,000 active members with TOPS who are earning 1 point for every dollar. So if you look at it, it's 10%, almost like a cashback, but 10% of their purchase goes towards their future purchase. And we're finding really great traction with the TOPS loyalty program. Now, that's a great benefit for us in terms of being able to have a direct dialogue with our shoppers, because we're incentivized then to send them relevant information depending on what they're buying. But also it's a real great a service and value for our brands that we're retailing in our stores, because we can put customized emails to their shoppers, to their consumers.
Oh, makes perfect sense.
That's a very good point about having a CRM.
I believe in
Ways that you
CRM.
can basically, utilize and leverage the data that you're accumulating, and just stay on task, to be fair. But ultimately, loyalty program's a great one. Yes, like content marketing is, like that's what we're talking about. Or, social media is still a great avenue for, this sort of stuff. Local advertising can be done in many ways. Just look into the parameters and, and make sure that you're doing things that you can A, afford, and B, that, align with the brand.
Yeah,
And
ultimately to create programs that are relevant.
Yeah,
That's right.
definitely. Well, I think we touched somewhat on regulations here earlier, but we do a lot of work with compliance, and I'm just curious for brands when they're building it, when they're building brand, trying to break through. Is that something that is kind of a blind spot, or do people understand like these? You got to make sure you hit all these regulations. You got to make sure you think about safety. You got to make sure of all that stuff. Or is that something that, I guess, when people, it's not the first thing they think of when making their cannabis?
If you're working with the right people, you do.
You got to have it from the start.
Yeah, like you better be all over. Like that's a great way to ruin your business right away, right? Imagine going again, I'll do the whole thing. Imagine all the work you do, you put it in, blah, blah, everything's great, all this vetting, money invested, etc. And you're missing like 4 pieces on your package that, will basically, tank the company because you're not even adhering to that state's regulations.
That's right, because your retailers will send all your product back to you.
That's right. Yep. That's if you could even get the COAs for it, which you probably wouldn't. And so, you know what I mean? Like, again, what are you doing? You know what I mean? Like, you must be prepared. No one's saying you got to go get a law degree. No one's saying that you have to be the most expert. It is not hard to Google compliance for cannabis brands in California. It's really not. And it's all right there for you. You can understand if you don't know what something means. There's plenty of people that you can ask about that will give that to you and not charge you an attorney's hourly wages. I'm one. Call me. I'll literally tell you.
Yeah. If you don't know, you're going to find out.
Ultimately, just yes, it could not be more important. You think that we need to give anybody any extra ways to ruin a company in cannabis these days? I don't think we do. So bottom line is, yes, you might disagree with the hoops. You might disagree with how it affects the look. I can understand. These are definitely things that are bothersome and that other companies don't have to worry about in other industries. But that's not where we're at. So either we're gonna do what we need to do, or what are you doing?
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense. You mentioned COAs. When we talked about the packaging, the way you present products, and then ways you can differentiate. Has it been your experience, both of you, that customers are really looking at those ingredients really closely, maybe not on the same level, but similar to how they would in the supermarket, things like that? Are they really looking at that stuff hard?
Some.
I agree. Some, yes.
You've probably seen a lot of the lucid green IDs that are starting to make their way on shelves that, as soon as you scan it, it'll take you straight to the COA. Some brands have their own form of QR code where it'll take you directly to the COA. I think that is about transparency. That's the wave of where things are going in terms of clean cannabis, and also an effective way for the legal industry to differentiate versus the legacy market.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, they got the receipt.
Ingredients. Obviously, I think they're a huge differentiator, and the way that you construct your product can absolutely, really, really vault you into where you want to be. And if you're with if you have a good partner, a good, place that maybe can even tie you into patent development and, IP and owning your own, product altogether, that makes your company more valuable. Those are things that a lot of places don't either do or know about, or maybe not addressing. And those are things that you might want to look into at a point. Those ingredients are special, and if you can make a special combination, that can be extra special for your brand. So.
Mm-hmm. I think we spoke earlier this week, Brian. You mentioned about the importance of budgeting. I think with cannabis, it can be so hard to get funding. To put it simply, to put it lightly. Right. You get the money. Let's say you have the budget. Where's the smartest ways to kind of allocate that from the beginning? I guess it's not a one size fits all, but if somebody's trying to think about what to do out there, how do you make it last and use it smartly? I guess.
Wow. I mean, it depends greatly on, what your, well, A, how much you have, and then B, of course, what you really want to do, there's many reasons why people would want to get in the market. I think people need to be more realistic about sort of what it takes to go from, hey, let's do a couple of products in the space to, okay, now products are on shelves, right? That doesn't happen for, 20 grand. It doesn't. I'm sorry. Like, I know, but it barely happens for 100. And that's if you could find a partner with a license. If you wanted to get your license, well, then now we're talking millions and millions just to get this many product out into the market. So let's be realistic with each other and ourselves, especially about what it's going to take to get there. No one's saying that you shouldn't go for it. I'm in fact saying the opposite. I'm saying just be strategic about it, be knowledgeable, and understand that, if you don't have it, that doesn't mean that you should stop. In fact, it just means that you need to find ways to get there, right? There are many, many ways that you can get there, especially if you really feel like you have something. People want to listen. People want to hear this. People will want to potentially invest. People will potentially want to work with you to develop that IP if that's where we're going. Or if you just have a really cool brand idea, that might be enough to kind of get there, right? Maybe you start chunking away at it. Maybe there's a way to find partners who can help you. But that's the thing, is unless you're coming with about, a couple $100,000 at the very least, and a strong partner who's pretty darn vertically integrated, or, has some really good manufacturing and R&D chops, you're going to need to work your way up to that. And there are many, many ways to do so. And I would just implore people to explore them and to not be afraid of that, but also to be realistic about where they're at.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. What do you think of that, Angela? Where would you put, it is a bit general not every company, every market's different, but is there maybe like, I wouldn't say a mistake, but something that a lot of people, you see people face time and time again that maybe could be avoided budgeted wise?
Trying to do too much. You can't do everything. Choose 2 or 3 tactics and hit those rather than trying to do absolutely everything. Because I would put the money at the store level where you're going to have your conversion, where you're going to have your bud tender who's going to be influencing that purchase. And I would look at tactics that are driving traffic to stores. So is it programmatic? Is it certain platforms that are, approaching shoppers as they're already in the consideration stage, that you have trackable ROI? That's
right. Trackable ROI. And, don't try to do too much and be too many things. That applies to so much of life.
Yeah, ultimately, yes, obviously. Yes.
Yeah,
I think
the reality is that marketing dollars do dry up in this industry. You've seen that time and time again. It's a cyclical event that happens. And if you have grand plans for something, you're trying to do 12 things, your budget dries up, you can't do any of them. But if you're really focused on 2 or 3 things, you might have a good chance that at least you can hit 1 or 2 of them.
Yeah, that's 100. I could not agree with Angela more. That is ultimately it, and even at risk of like losing business, I will say be careful about rolling out a whole ton of products. Like, do 1 or 2 at first, build your story around those. There'll be time, right? Especially if you got that core formulations down, you're feeling good, the product's testing well with the people that you're looking at, you've identified the audience, you've got budget enough for it. Just do that 1 or those couple of products at first, and then let them kind of take off a little bit, and then start maybe looking at diversifying and growing your product. Right?
Yeah, creating your destination brands.
That's right. Got it.
That's awesome. Well, guys, this has been great. I think we almost came to the end of the whole hour.
Hey.
And there's a lot of great tips for people looking out there to start a cannabis brand, or if they already have one and they want to try to, make it stick out more. All very helpful, and I really appreciate it. Where can let's go ahead and bring it up where people can find more about you guys' companies. Here you can reach out, I guess, on LinkedIn or on the company website. And if you'd like to learn more about Rootwurks and our education and compliance solutions for cannabis, we mentioned some in this webinar about the importance of cannabis education and training, and that's our big specialty here. And it's crucial for all different types of people in the industry, but especially new brands and people trying to stick out and make a name. So on that note, again, thanks for being here today, all, and thanks everybody for watching. And best of luck to everybody out there in this industry.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Brian.
Yep. Thanks,
Thank you, Angela, Ben. Thank you. It was a great conversation. Look forward to it again soon. Take care.
Absolutely. Bye, all.